Application example of an ALV grid control. We're gonna create an ALV control in one of our programs. So the ALV grid control, also called the SAP list viewer, is used for displaying an internal table on a screen. It has numerous user functions. On the screen, the user can vary the width of the columns, or the width can be automatically adjusted to the current data. The display position of the columns can also be changed by means of drag and drop. The standard push buttons of the control can be used to execute, among others, the following functions. The detailed display shows the fields which were previously selected. The sorting function provides the user with the option of specifying complex sorting criteria. You can use the search function for searching for a character string. You can form totals for one or each of several numerical columns. You can also print and download with the corresponding push buttons. The user can save his or her settings in the grid control as a display variant and reuse them at a later time. So, how do we design a ALV control, grid control in our screen? So, an Enjoy SAP control must always be embedded in a SAP container control, from now on referred to as container. The container must be integrated into a prepared control area on the screen. So, for example, we have screen 100. In screen 100 we define an area on the screen where we're going to place our ALV grid control. So we define that area by placing a custom container control or a container in the screen painter. You have to open the screen painter and place a custom container control. And inside that custom container control, we're going to place an ALV grid control using the corresponding class. So let's log into the system and create a container control. So we're going to create an ALV control grid for our C flight screen program. So let's navigate to the object navigator, to our course, to our programs. Let's look for here we go, the flight screen program. So remember this program, I'm going to run it to show you what we're going to do. So this program displays this internal table to the screen, but this looks, you don't have many functions and you can't manipulate this list. So we're going to display this list using the ALV grid. So to do that, we need to create another screen where we're going to place our ALV grid. So let's go back and we are going to create another screen. Remember, we have a screen 100. So let's create a screen this is going to be screen 200, and this is the arrivals, departures main screen. It's going to be a normal screen, and the next screen it's going to be the 100 screen. Remember the flight details screen. So we place that and we save and activate our screen. So once the screen is active, we're going to go to the screen painter by clicking on the layout button, and we're going to place a container in our screen. So I click on layout. Let me just make this screen a little bit brighter. There you go. And now we open the screen painter, clicking on the layout button. Now the screen painter is loading. It takes a while. That's one of the disadvantages of working on a client server infrastructure. You depend on your internet connection. There you go, the screen painter. And in our screen we're going to place the custom control where we want to display our ALV. So we want to display it on all of the screen. There you go. Now we place the custom control, and we can name custom control ALV, and we save, and we go back to our flow logic. So now that we have our ALV control, let me explain a little bit more of what we're going to do. So you can use these instances to address the elements in the GUI. To do so, your SAP system has standard classes from which you can generate the container and grid control instance. So as we saw, we added the custom container control, and now we have to use its corresponding class, the CL_GUI_custom container class, to make an instance of this class in our program and declare it so we can start using our custom container to place our ALV grid. So let's take a look at the constructor method of the container class. I'm assuming you are familiar with constructors in method class. To obtain detailed information on a global class or method, you can navigate to the class builder, that is the transaction SE24. The method constructor of the global class CL_GUI custom container, or the class for the container, has the required parameter container name. Hence, as a minimum, this parameter has to be supplied with data when the container instance is created. So when we declare it in our program and we use the create object ABAP statement, we have to also pass this parameter, the container name. Let's take a look at this class inside the SAP system and the constructor, so we can learn how to navigate to the classes using transaction SE24. Before we implement the class for the container in our program, let's take a look at that class and the parameters and the obligatory parameters that we have to specify when we declare and use the create object ABAP statement. So we're going to open a new window. We do that by using /n SE24. That opens the transaction, the class builder, in a new window, and we type the GUI container class. Let me look for it. I don't remember the exact name. That will be this one. That will be the custom container. I'm sorry. and I display my class. And then I'm going to take a look at the constructor method. So I scroll down until I find my constructor method. So just scroll patiently. There you go, it was the last one. And I select it and I take a look at the parameters of this method. So I'm going to expand these columns and the optional. So you see all the parameters are optional except the container name. So whenever you use the create object and the container, you must always specify the container name parameter for the name of your new created container. Important methods for the grid control class. The global class CL_GUI_ALV grid has numerous methods that can be called for the corresponding grid control functions. To display the contents of an internal table with an ALV grid control, it suffices to know details about the following three methods. The constructor method, the one that we just saw in the system. The grid class 2 has a constructor. The only required parameter is the I_parent parameter, to which the already created container instance. The setTableForFirstDisplay method. This method of the created grid control instance is used for transferring data and settings to the grid control. The internal table to be displayed must be transferred to parameter IT_out tab. And the refreshTableDisplay method. You only have to call this method if the table content, which has changed in the meantime, is to be loaded for updating the display of the grid control in case the screen is processed again. So this is not always obligatory that you implement it. So now let's go back to the system and let's finish implementing our ALV grid. So let's go back to our program and let's start implementing our ALV grid. So I'm going to go back to my program, see flight screen. And remember, we create another screen for this. So in our main program, we're going to declare the variables that we need. So I'm going to click on edit and more data objects. We're going to declare the container reference, type ref2, our class, and also my grid. To type my ALV grid class. So we save, and that's the first step. Then we need to create in the screen a new model where we're going to create or make an instance of our objects. So we need to go back to the screen 200, click, and then we need to create a model for this. So we're going to create a model that is going to be called create container and ALV. I double click, yes, create my object, and I'm going to create in the PVO models and inside we're going to ask if our variable container is initial, that means that it is still not instantiated, so we use the create object container R exporting the parameter. Remember the required parameter container name and let's call it container1. And also we want to create our grid, and the grid, remember, that needs the obligatory parameter, the iParent, and this is the container that is going to be its parent. So we specify the created object container and we save. Now, after we create our objects and we assign the ALV to our container, we want to set our internal table to the screen. So how do we do that? We use the method set table for first display. So we can either type it, or I'm going to show you another way we can use the pattern. We click ABAP objects pattern, and here you select call method. So the instance is the grid R instance, the class or interface is the CL GUI ALV grid, and the method will look for it. So we press on the search button. It was the set table for first display, remember. So I'm sorry, my screen is having some problems. There you go. So I'm going to drag this here, and we have to go all the way down to the letter S. Set table for first display. I select and I click OK, and as you can see, the wizard writes all the code for me. And as you can see, all this is commented because it is not obligatory. So the only thing that is obligatory is the internal table you have to pass. So remember the internal table. The internal table was in the program. So let's go navigate to our program. And the internal table we're using to store the data is this one. So I'm going to copy this, go back to my screen, go back to my model, and I specify my table. But I want a structure to be displayed also, so I'm going to specify the optional parameter is structure name, and I want the sp_flee structure of the same table to be displayed. There you go. So now I'm ready. I save, and now I can activate all of my objects. I had an error. Let's take care of that error. And this is not expected. Yes, because I forgot to uncomment the exporting parameter. Now I check again, there's no error, and this time I activate. And now it's active. So once we have our code implemented, we're ready to run our program. So I double click my program, and now it should show our internal table in a ALV grid. So I run it, and it's not showing anything. We have a problem. Let's go back and let's take a look at what happened. Go back. Let's go back to the screen. Let's take a look. Let's examine our code. Probably there's a problem with the container name. I think the container name is not the correct one. I'm sorry, I was using the container name from another course. The container name for our course was, let's take a look in the element list. It was cc_ALV, so I'm going to copy this. By the way, go ahead and add the OK code if you don't have it yet in this screen. So I copy this container name, I go back to the flow logic, back to my model, and I paste my container name. Now it should work. I activate one more time, double click my program and run it, and now it's working. Now I have the ALV grid control. This is the SAP list viewer. So as you can see, it displays the same information, the carrier ID, the flight number, the city from, the city to. It basically shows all of the information that we had in the internal table. And this has a lot of functions. For example, I can sort in ascending order or in descending the airlines, and it groups them, or ascending, and it also groups everything. I can also filter. For example, I have to look for something, and I only want to look at the departure city for New York, for example. So I select New York, okay, and it only filters the New York departures or flights. For example, if I want to display the total for the distance, I select the column distance and I click on the sum button or total, so it displays the total distance for New York were 12,324 kilometers or 8,995 miles. I can also print this list if I want to. I can search for a specific string, and I can export this, for example, to a spreadsheet, Excel, a word processing, a local file, or any other HTML download, or more options. So as you can see, the ALV grid control is really useful to display basic lists because it has a lot of functions that you can reuse. And remember that function that we have where we double click and it displays the details. We lost that function because that function was programmed in the basic list. In the ALV you have to program the double click event, and we're going to take a look at that on a later course. So this is the ALV grid control using the classes that SAP offer us to use. One thing I forgot to tell you is that remember that we created our screen, but we never called our screen from the main program. I did that, but I didn't tell you that I do that. So in our program, remember the program, the start of selection, first we collect the data for our internal table, and after we print this to the screen, we implement the call screen 200 before the add-line selection event. So this, as soon as you run the program, it's going to process the internal table and then it's going to call the screen with the information. So remember to always use the call screen to call your created screens. So now you should now be able to execute the basic steps in object-oriented ABAP program instantiation and method calls to use the classes and methods shipped in the SAP standard system. Use this SAP Grid Control SAP List Viewer to display an internal table on a screen.